Hello, I'm Sophia, and welcome to What We Need to Know About Ukraine. Here, I learn about Ukrainian history, literature, and culture, and share my findings with you. Today's episode is about Stepan Bandera, a Ukrainian nationalist, politician, activist, and thinker who strove towards Ukrainian independence his whole life. It is no wonder that he was completely demonized in the Soviet Union and still is in the Russian Federation. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, he was and still is idolized by some and disliked by others. He is still an extremely controversial Ukrainian hero, but probably because of his radicalism, which is misunderstood in present-day society. How can you not be radical to achieve your goals when your country is under constant occupation of other radical powers like those of Hitler and Stalin? Let's keep this in mind while we try to find out who really was Stepan Bandera. I will quickly let you know that listening to my episode called Ukraine in World War II, Unbroken Spirit or Forgotten History will really help you understand the topic at hand, since not only do I talk about Ukraine's experience during the Second World War, but I also explain some things that I mention here in more detail. Okay, let's start with a quote from Stepan Bandera. When people choosing between bread and freedom choose bread, they ultimately lose everything, including bread. If people choose freedom, they will have bread they made themselves, bread not taken away by anyone. Bandera was not a military person, and not in the Ukrainian insurgent army during and after the Second World War, nor did he contribute to it at all. But it somehow happened that Banderivtsi is what the public calls all the Ukrainian revolutionaries of the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, especially the ones who used weapons to fight for Ukrainian freedom. Today we will find out why that is. Bandera himself came up with an ideology and was a theorist and a revolutionary. He was the head of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the one that was in Lviv. But he was also much more than that. Stepan Bandera was born on January 1st, 1909, in a village in western Ukraine. His father was a priest, and he grew up not only with the church, but also with a strong sense of patriotism towards Ukraine. Bandera lived through the First World War, and the front lines have gone through his village 4 times. In his autobiography, he noted that he remembered the differences between the Ukrainian and the Russian soldiers. He was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but around the age of 10, the Western Ukrainian People's Republic was declared, and he now lived in a Ukrainian country. If you want to know more about the state, listen to my episode called Ukrainian People's Republic, What is it? With the declaration of the new Ukrainian state, he grew up with Ukrainians fighting for their independence. He was witnessing the rebirth of a Ukrainian nation suppressed for a long time. But soon enough, in a few years, the land on which he lived transferred to Poland. Not easily, of course. It was a lengthy war, and after the defeat of Ukraine, about 100,000 Ukrainians were interned in concentration camps where they were denied food, medicine, etc., and some of them died, around 20,000 of them. In 1929, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists was created, and Bandera was just 20 years old. The Polish government automatically condemned this organization as a terrorist one, since it went against the government. So in 1930, the pacification began. And pacification means an attempt to create or maintain peace, but it is anything except peaceful. The pacification of Ukrainians in eastern Galicia, which is the region of western Ukraine that was moved to Poland, led to the Polish police searching private homes, destroying them and the belongings in them, and often the people in those homes were beaten and arrested. Ukrainian schools were also closed. Ukrainian language was forbidden, with that followed the closure of publishing houses, etc. Of course, Ukrainians did not like this, so Ukrainian nationalists created this organization that would fight against Poland, as well as against the Soviet propaganda that was trying to spread to Western Ukraine. They had no army, so they decided that they would use terror, and not against the regular citizens, of course. They could rob a bank, for instance, but it once escalated to the point of killing one of the heads of the pacification, the Polish Minister of Internal Affairs. There were around 20 people that were sentenced from 3 to 8 years in jail, and most of them were university students. But Bandera got a death sentence because he was the coordinator and the head of the organization. This was also used to demonstrate that Ukrainians must behave and steer away from nationalistic ideas. In the end, though, Bandera's death sentence was changed to a life sentence in prison, most likely to lessen the potentially dangerous response from the Ukrainian nationalists, whose leader they would kill. So Bandera got sentenced in 1934 and was in jail until 1939. He was imprisoned in Brest-Litovsk, which is modern-day Belarus, in solitary confinement where he did 3 hunger strikes. At the beginning of the Second World War, when Poland was attacked by the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, Stepan Bandera managed to escape prison along with all the other prisoners, since everything was in complete chaos and disorder. By the time he got back to Lviv, it was controlled by the Soviet Union, since Poland as a state ceased to exist. This means that the organization of Ukrainian nationalists is now pitted against the USSR. With the arrival of the Soviet Union, many people from the organization, or suspected of being in the organization, were jailed, an incredibly high number. And in 1941, with the Soviet Union withdrawing, most will be executed by the Soviets. After he escaped from prison and before Germany invaded Ukraine, Bandera was developing his ideas and ideologies and lived relatively quietly. With the German invasion, Bandera emphasized that he did not want any relations with Nazi Germany, but saw no other option and wanted to use what seemed to be a change to get Ukrainian independence. Other Western countries, or any countries really, did not know or care about Ukrainians as a nation. They did not even see a possibility for Ukrainians to be separate from Imperial Russia. History is forgotten quickly, often, and whenever convenient. But the Germans knew of Ukrainians as separate and potentially helpful. Ukrainian nationalists, led by Bandera, were accused of creating groups like the Nachtigall Battalion, or Nightingale Battalion in English, in 1941. This battalion was part of the Ukrainian Legion, which was created in 1939 and controlled by Nazi Germany, but also had not sworn allegiance to Germany, which is important to point out, and was composed of Ukrainian volunteers, many of whom supported the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, OUNB, which means the one led by Bandera. In the World War II episode, I explained that there were two, the more radical one, led by Bandera in Lviv, and OUNM, the more moderate one, led by Andriy Melnik in Kyiv. These groups, like Nightingale Battalion, were accused of many horrible acts towards Poles, Jews, etc., but none have ever been proven. The International Commission that was set up at The Hague in the Netherlands and was to carry out investigations concluded that, quote, after 4 months of inquiries and the evaluation of 232 statements by witnesses from all circles involved, it can be established that the accusations against Battalion Nachtigall and against the then Lieutenant and currently Federal Minister Oberlander have no foundation in fact. End of quote. After all, there truly is no proof regarding these accusations. The battalion's main priority was securing the radio station, newspapers, and proclaiming Ukrainian independence, which I will talk about shortly. Why did Nazi Germany need a Ukrainian legion in the first place? Well, they needed allies that were not happy living under Poland and would help Nazi Germany take over Poland. And why did Ukraine want such a legion? Well, that was because Ukraine did not have its own army. Imagine being attacked by the Russian Soviet Union and by Germany and being repressed by Poland all at once. All with no army. Not ideal. So it is highly doubtful that the Holodomor genocide of the 1930s would have happened if Ukraine had an army to fight back. If you want to know more about the Holodomor, listen to my Holodomor Genocide of the Ukrainian People episode. In any case, Ukrainians see a window of opportunity where, with the help of Germans, they can get rid of the Soviet Union. Since this legion was allied with Germany but did not swear allegiance to Nazi Germany or anything like that, Bandera was doing the only possible thing during that time, which was look for an ally. And like I mentioned, not many people wanted to ally with Ukraine, and Germany was the sole option. Now, let's see if we should play the blame game here. Should we blame Ukraine for any of this? Now, let us remember that Ukraine was occupied by Germany and the Soviet Union at the same time during that time. Let us also remember that Poland joined Hitler in dividing Czechoslovakia between themselves, and the leaders of France and the UK signed off on that decision. And finally, let's remember the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was the Treaty of Non-Aggression Pact between Germany and the USSR represented by Moscow, as well as the division of Poland between the two countries. We can clearly see that any alliance or cooperation with Hitler can soon turn into fighting against Hitler, and that happened with Ukraine as well. But of course, for more about Ukraine during the Second World War, listen to Ukraine in World War II, Unbroken Spirit, or Forgotten History. Now, the German army did not use the Ukrainian Legion after all, since the Soviet Red Army retreated eastward really quickly. Therefore, when the Nightingale Battalion reached Lviv and secured the radio station, it stopped there. That is where, on the 30th of June, 1941, just 8 days after Germany attacked the Soviet Union, they signed the Act of Restoration of the Ukrainian State. It was announced by the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists under Bandera's leadership, and Bandera was the person that signed this document. The Prime Minister was declared to be Yaroslav Stetsko. This means that an independent Ukrainian state was announced, and of course there was a caveat since this land was occupied, if not by Moscow, then by Germany, so Ukrainians had to promise Germans close alignment. So I will read to you the Act of Proclamation of the Ukrainian Statehood so you can see just how it was phrased. 1. By the will of the Ukrainian people, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, under the direction of Stepan Bandera, proclaims the formation of the Ukrainian state, for which have laid down their heads whole generations of the finest sons of Ukraine. The Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, which under the direction and founder and leader Yevhen Konovalets had undertaken in the past 10 years a bloody battle with the Muscovite Bolshevik enslavers in an energetic battle for freedom, calls all the Ukrainian people not to place down its weapons until all Ukrainian lands are united to form a sovereign Ukrainian government. The sovereign Ukrainian government will guarantee Ukrainian people order, unilateral development of its energies, and all its needs. 2. In the western lands of Ukraine, a Ukrainian government is formed, which is subordinate to the Ukrainian national government that will be formed in the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv. 3. The newly formed Ukrainian state will work closely with the National Socialist Greater Germany, under the leadership of its leader, Adolf Hitler, which is forming a new order in Europe and the world and is helping the Ukrainian people to free themselves from Muscovite occupation. The Ukrainian People's Revolutionary Army, which has been formed on the Ukrainian lands, will continue to fight with the Allied German Army against Muscovite occupation for a sovereign and united state and a new order in the whole world. Long live a sovereign and united Ukraine! Long live the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists! Long live the leader of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists and the Ukrainian people, Stepan Bandera! Glory to Ukraine! Glory to her heroes! End of quote. And for those of you who don't know, Muscovite refers to Moscow. But even this act the Germans did not like, although the Germans did promise Ukrainians freedom, but only after the war, which we all know they didn't actually intend to do. They arrested Stepan Bandera and started repressions against the Ukrainian people. The newly declared Ukrainian government was sent to concentration camps or shot to death. It is needless to say that during the same summer of 1941, the alliance between the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists and the Germans dissolved. On the 25th of November 1941, Nazi Germany released a document that stated, quote, "The Bandera movement is preparing a revolt in the Reichskommissariat, which has at its ultimate aim the establishment of an independent Ukraine. All functionaries of the Bandera movement must be arrested at once, and after thorough interrogations are to be liquidated. End of quote. Reichskommissariat was the civilian occupation regime of the majority of Ukrainian lands that were occupied by Nazi Germany. So this document meant that everyone supporting Bandera, and therefore supporting independent Ukraine, must be arrested, interrogated, and executed without trial. The soldiers in Ukrainian battalions like Nightingale were in time arrested for their refusal to swear allegiance to Hitler. Some managed to escape and create the Ukrainian insurgent army or join the Ukrainian insurgent army, but that is an entirely different topic. Ukraine had many political organizations at the time, but only the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists suffered so much terror, and not even for the first time. So they in turn started terrorizing the Germans with creating partisan groups and more. And now let's get back to Bandera. He was arrested almost instantly and was sent to a concentration camp. But of course, just like in ancient Rome, the Germans treated the quote-unquote important people slightly better. By important, I mean ministers, monarchs, etc. They were not killed, but kept aside in relatively okay shape, of course depends on who, since they could potentially use these people, if need be, to present a legitimate ruler, for example, or something like that. Other people which had the same treatment as Bandera were the son of Stalin, Chancellor of Austria, and some ex-ministers of France. This did not guarantee safety from torture or death, but most did survive. Bandera was in the Nazi concentration camp until 1944-1945. And what about Bandera's family? What happened to them? Stepan Bandera's brother Vasil died in Auschwitz concentration camp. His other brother was killed by the Nazis near Kherson. His father was killed by the Soviets in Kyiv. Meanwhile, Bandera's sisters were deported to Siberia. Closer to the end of the Second World War, Bandera was offered to leave prison if he agrees to join the Russian Liberation Army, which Bandera rejected. And I think this says a lot about his principles and ideology, because he did not want to be part of a joint Russian Liberation Army with a person from Moscow at the head of it. Stepan Bandera again became the chairman of the board of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists after the war, when he was released from jail. As the leader of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, Bandera decided to continue the armed struggle against Moscow in the post-war period. He zealously organized the border communications and combat groups of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. He remained the leader of the organization until his death in 1959. He was assassinated by a Soviet KGB agent using cyanide gas. Bandera had a wife and 3 children. But now let's talk about his ideology. Bandera wanted an independent Ukrainian state, but he recognized that as long as Moscow was imperialist and had any other colonies in Central Asia or Eastern Europe, Ukraine's mission was not finished. Since an imperialist Russia is a constant threat, and these words are still supported by the events of today. Bandera was neither pro-totalitarian regimes nor extremely pro-democratic states. His sole focus was achieving freedom, and achieving it with Ukrainians' hard work. He often referenced the lines of Lesya Ukrainka, a Ukrainian writer, and she said, quote, "He who frees himself will be free, and he who is freed by someone else will be enslaved by them." End quote. Therefore, Bandera formulated how Ukraine must free itself, and this is what he said. The Ukrainian people can gain an independent state only through their own struggle and hard work. The favorable development of the international situation can largely contribute to the new development and success of our liberation struggle, but it can only play an auxiliary, albeit very useful role. Without the Ukrainian people's own struggles, the most favorable situation will never give us state independence, except for the replacement of one enslavement by another. Both the liberation and the defense of an independent Ukraine can fundamentally rely only on Ukraine's own forces, on its own struggle and constant readiness for self-defense." End quote. I think this goes for any country or nation wanting independence as well. Stepan Bandera also talks about how to get this independence and how important an ideology really is in achieving freedom. The following quotes not only talk about what an ideology is, but also imply that Bandera's ideology is solely the yearning of Ukrainians for freedom and the aspirations of Ukrainians. He wants nothing more, nothing less. Quote, "The ideology that defines the goals of the liberation revolution, its program in the fundamental issues of the new order, and the way to implement those goals into life is of particular importance. The idea is the soul, generating and driving force of the entire liberation movement. It is its most raw, unchanging essence. The vitality, durability, and victory of the revolution depends primarily on the strength and quality of the idea that is the driving force. How much it corresponds to the spirituality, nature, life aspirations, and needs of the people. How much it expresses its best impulses and mobilizes the noble, dynamic, heroic elements of the nation, and the same foundations in the human soul." End of quote. He goes on to say in another quote, "Our liberation concept, ideology, and program of Ukrainian nationalism must clearly reflect the most essential aspirations of the Ukrainian people in the most raw form, without extraneous and hostile suggestions and distortions, and at the same time form national and political consciousness." End of quote. Bandera not only worked hard to get Ukraine's independence in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, but also inspired and influenced many people that kept fighting for Ukraine and are still fighting for Ukraine today. I will end with a few more powerful lines from Stepan Bandera, who is an extraordinary thinker, which explain why Ukrainians appreciate his philosophy and agree with him, meanwhile the Soviet Union and present-day Russia despise him so much. Quote, "Ukraine is that irreconcilable force which fights an invader and subjugator. It acts exclusively according to its own law, has its unavoidable direction to a sovereign Ukrainian state. Not only does Ukraine continue to resist the hardest possible conditions, but it also lives with its own free life. Ukrainian people become the center, the organization, and the prime force of the common anti-Bolshevism front of all the nations suppressed by the Bolshevism. And most importantly, Ukraine is the historical gravedigger of Moscow Bolshevism and imperialism, suppression and violence. At the same time, it is the pioneer and the center of crystallization of a new order on the ruins of the USSR. The order of the freedom and justice in the relationships between free nations and people. This is the historical mission of Ukraine and its factual role today, and according to this, does Ukraine get its international position." Thank you so much for joining me today, and this was What We Need to Know About Ukraine this week.